This sikha is going to be discussing and looking at the meaning of the words Eile Pekudei of the beginning of our parsha. There's a machloikas in the Mefarshim. First of all, what is the word Eile referring to? These are. And second of all, what is the translation, the meaning of Pekudei? One way of understanding it is that Eile refers to that which has been discussed in the previous parsha and Parshas Vayakel about the details of how the Mishkan and its Kalim were made. So the meaning of Pekudei would then mean, Eile Pekudei, these are the Pekudeis from the word of the assignments, the tasks. The Pasuk is saying, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, these are the assignments or the tasks that were assigned by Moshe Rabbeinu, and he gave over the tasks, the assignments to the Leviim, headed by Isamar. In other words, the Leviim are the ones that are appointed to carry the Mishkan and its utensils and its Kalim. Then there's another way of understanding Eile Pekudei, that we're speaking about the accounting, the calculations of the gold, silver, and copper of the donations of the Mishkan, which is going to be discussed later in our parsha. And according to this, Pekudei would then mean counting, an account, a calculation. What would the end of the pasuk mean? Avodas haLeviim biyad Isamar, is that Isamar was the one in charge over the gold, silver, and copper with the help of the other Leviim. Now, when we come to Rashi, we seem to find something very surprising. It seems to be that Rashi is translating these words in two opposite ways. On the words Eile Pekudei, Rashi says, but Parsha Zu, in this Parsha, Nimnu, are counted, Kol Mishkalei Nidvas HaMishkan, all the weights of the donations of the Mishkan. It seems to be quite obvious that he's translating Pekudei as a calculation, the calculations of the donations of the Mishkan, and that it's referring to what's going to be coming up in our Parsha, as Rashi says, the Parsha Zu, not that which was discussed in Parshas Vayakel. But then when it comes to the words Avodas HaLeviim, Rashi says, Pekudei HaLeviim v'Kelav, Hi Avoda HaMesura LeLeviim b'Midbar. We're speaking about what the Leviim were appointed to do in the Midbar, to carry the Mishkan, to take it down, to set it back up, each one according to the specific tasks that they had. And now it sounds like Rashi is translating Pekudei HaMishkan not about the calculation of the donations, but rather the appointments, the assignments over the Mishkan, to carry, to dismantle, to set up. The Rebbe says, seemingly we would be able to say, based on the ending of the Rashi that we quoted before on Eile Pekudei, after Rashi says that all the weights of the donations of the Mishkan are counted, Rashi says that v'nimnu kol keilav l'chol avidasi, all the kelim of the avodah were also counted. In other words, that Pekudei HaMishkan includes two counts. Number one, the calculation of the donations, and also the calculation or the counting of the kelim of the different utensils, kelim, implements of the Mishkan. And how this connects to what Rashi says afterwards about the fact that Leviim were appointed over the Kalim is because as part of what they were appointed over was that they also are keeping track of the Kalim and supervising, making sure they're complete, etc. In other words, now it seems like Rashi is saying that Pekudei is referring to these two counts, and Rashi is just speaking about the fact of an appointment or a task. That was only to explain what the Torah is saying, Avodas HaLeviim, is because the Leviim and Isamar are in charge of this count. But Pekudei still seems to be, in the meantime, the way we're understanding it, is mainly referring to an account. But the Rebbe says what's not understood is what's forcing Rashi to say that we're speaking about two different kinds of counts. One of the donations and one of the Kalim. Especially that about the Kalim is going to be discussed much later in the Parsha with an interruption of other things in between. So why can't we just simply say that Pekudei, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan is referring to the counting of the donations of the Mishkan? And again, why the Leviim and Isamar are being mentioned is that they will make the account. The Rebbe asks some other questions in Rashi as well, but we're going to go mainly to the explanation, and some of these questions will be answered automatically. The Rebbe says the question that Rashi is really bothered by is a very, very simple one on the words Eile Pekudei. The word Eile usually sounds like it's starting a totally new thing. In fact, Rashi himself said earlier on in Parshas Mishpatim that anytime it says Eile, it's like canceling out what said previously was starting something new. But seemingly, Pekudei HaMishkan, which if we translate it as counting and as an account, is directly a continuation to the previous parsha. So why does it say Eila, not Ve'ela? We had the donations in the previous parsha, we had the Mishkan, and now we're going to count. So why does it say Eila instead of Ve'ela? And this is what Rashi is telling us by saying that Pekudei HaMishkan is not only about the donations, but it's also about the Kalim. And with this, Rashi is actually helping us understand that in this parsha we're starting something new in connection to the Mishkan, as we will explain. As mentioned before, Rashi says that in this parsha all the weights of the gold and the silver, the donations were counted. Now, seemingly it sounds like Rashi is translating Pekudei as an account. But the truth of the matter is that Rashi himself negates this interpretation. By saying v'nimnu kol kelev, that all the kelim were counted, he's clearly telling us that Pekudei does not mean counting. Because if Pekudei would mean counting, an account, Pekudei is not the act of counting. Pekudei, if we say Eila Pekudei, that would mean the total of everything. But when we look at the kelim, Rashi says the kelim are also included in Eila Pekudei. The Torah actually does not give us the sum total of all the kelim. The Torah is only enumerating them, only counting them. That's not what Pekudei means. So since, as Rashi tells us, Eila Pekudei means both the donations and the kelim, so Pekudei cannot actually mean counting. Rashi is coming to clarify that Pekudei has one meaning. It means assignments, appointing a task. That's number one. And number two, Rashi is clarifying, is that just like in regards to these kelim, there is no sum total given for them, so too when it comes to the donations, the point of counting them was not about knowing the total. Rather, it's about enumerating the donations. What's the purpose of enumerating the donations? Well, just like when we enumerate the vessels, the kelim. These are both part of the task of the person in charge. These are the appointments that we're talking about. The Torah is saying we're appointing certain people to take charge of the donations, of the kelim. In other words, just like by the kelim, it wasn't about to see how many there are. It was about to make sure that they're all done properly, that they're all done in the best way possible. In a similar way, the counting of the donations, Moshe is the one in charge, appointed over it. It's about keeping track of the donations of the Mishkan. In other words, making sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. And this is why we said that Eila means starting something new. This is the difference between our Parsha and Vayakel. In Parsha's Vayakel, we spoke first of all about the preparations for making the Mishkan, and then making the Mishkan itself. Now we're speaking about Pekudei HaMishkan, about certain tasks and assignments that people were given. Which task do we see that's given in our parsha? So Rashi is telling us that Nimnu kol Mishkalei Nidvas HaMishkan, the Nimnu kol Kelev. The task is about enumerating and counting the donations of the Mishkan and the Kelim. This is the job of the person that's put in charge, is to keep track of all the details. And in order to clarify even more this chidush of our parsha that was speaking about appointments, assignments over the Mishkan, the pasuk goes on to say, Avodas HaLevim biyadi somer, which, as Rashi explains, was speaking about the fact that the job that was given to the Levim was about taking care of the Mishkan and the Kelim, whether it's to carry it, whether it's to set it up, etc. In other words, Rashi is explaining that this is the idea of the appointment of the Mishkan, that while making the Mishkan, this was the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, but now these jobs are being given over to the Levim. The Rebbe says, based on all of this, we're also going to understand that when we look at the calculations in our parsha, there seems to be quite a few things missing, both as far as which donations are mentioned, also what was done with specific aspects of the gold, etc. The Rebbe enumerates a number of things. But the point is, again, in the calculations in our parsha are not coming to tell us that Moshe actually came and told the Yidden the bottom line of all the donations that came in, so that no one should be suspected of taking any donations, etc. Rather, what we're saying, it's part of Moshe's job, is to keep track of all the donations. That's the job of the person appointed. And therefore, it's enough to just give examples of some of the donations, and we mentioned some of the calculations. The Rebbe now moves on to the Yenishal Torah, to the Hira, and to the Chassidus of this Rashi. Rashi uses the term, Nimnu kol Mishkalei Nidvas HaMishkan. All the weights were counted. What do we see over here? We're focusing on the weight rather than the value. What's the difference between weight and value? The value would be more connected to the importance of the thing that you're speaking about, the quality of it. Weight is more speaking about the physical, materialistic aspect of it, or more the quantity. In Avodah, in our making the Mishkan for Hashem through our Torah and mitzvahs, we have the action itself, the physical action, which is more like the weight. We then have the kavanah, the inner intent, and that's more like the value, the quality, etc. So one may think that if you're giving to Hashem with kavanah, then you're actually making this Mishkan for Hashem. But if you only have the weight, only the action, how are you making a Mishkan? Comes along Rashi and says no. Mishkale nidvas ha-Mishkan was in a way of Pekudei pi Moshe, which means that Moshe Rabbeinu was sort of in charge to make also these weights that the Yidden gave. He's making them to become also a part of the Mishkan of Hashem. And finally, says the Rebbe, that it comes in a way, as we say, what happened with the matbeis, with the coins that the Yidden gave, they become like a fiery coin. In other words, permeated with the fire of the neshama. And that's the way we build our own personal Mishkan, and through that we're also zoicha to the binyan beis hamikdash hashlishi b'meheira v'yameinu mamash.